Hello, Dr. Barker here, and I'm just like to cover a little bit about the three theories on risk communication that we're studying this week. There are really three: rhetorical theory, social amplification theory, and behavioral theory. And I think trying to put those three together, we ask ourselves where the variables lie in risk assessment and communication, and they have to do with the areas that you look at in research. One of the problems that we've come across is the lack of acceptance of risk communication messages, and those lie in three basic areas. So let's look at what causes them to cause that lack of acceptance, and then look at these three theories that show ways that scholars have found to increase the probability of acceptance of a risk message. First is that there's these special cases in environmental and health issues where communication typically breaks down. They're usually well-known cases: 3 Mile Island, Hanford nuclear site, and in the Washington Love Canal, DuPont in Bhopal, India. These are areas where there's so much media coverage, and the issues are so complex that the communication just breaks down, and so risk messages often have difficulty getting believed in those areas. The other is the voices of science, industry, regulatory agencies often conflict. And because of that, risk communication often breaks down. The third area is the separation of risk analysis and risk assessment into separate fields in risk communication. That has been a source of difficulty for a long time in getting risk messages accepted. And so the three theories that we look at this week, rhetorical theory, social amplification theory, and behavioral theory, all have explanatory power to help us understand what happens when risks are communicated, and why they go wrong, and where we need to put our efforts into doing research to improve risk communication. But this material can be useful for us later on when we look at ways that we might address some of the problems in risk communication in the case studies in this class. If I were to organize these theories then into some kind of continuum, what I would do is to, on the one hand, have a focus on behavioral psychology and the behavioral theory, and on the other end of the continuum have another focus on the social amplification theory. These two kinds of theories, the one focusing on the behavioral approach, looks at psychology as a major variable in how well messages are received, and by implication, how messages should be designed and delivered. On the other hand, the social amplification approach looks at institutions, or what they call stations in amplification theory, to affect how risk messages are affected. So looking at the individual behavior, and then looking at social behavior. So there's this group versus individual approach. Where then would the rhetorical approach exemplified in the Grable article fall in these three? In my reading, what Grable attempts to do is to contrast the rhetorical approach with both the behaviorist approach and the social amplification approach, offering a critical stance or an alternative way of looking at those. So I guess a good question would be, what is the criticism of the behaviorist and the social science approach that we find in Grable? He seems to not completely dismiss them because science, after all, is very important, but to argue that the public needs to have an equal voice epistemologically in the knowledge making about risk. And I think that's one of the criticisms of these two other approaches, is that that they don't allow the public to have a voice in the knowledge making for risk communication, but are more communicating the message to people after the fact. The behavioralist approach arguing that it's a matter of one's risk perceptions in how one receives the message. The other arguing that the larger social factors affect the message. I think Grable takes neither approach and believing that neither of them has what I call here ontological privilege, which is that risk messages exist or risk reality exists somewhere, and that it's the job of the risk communicator simply to communicate that, transmit or transfer that message. The rhetorical approach offers a way a theory that says involving the risk, the stakeholder in the construction of the risk message, it gives is an approach that allows for another alternative to how we might get these messages accepted more readily. So seeing Grable's article as a criticism of the other two adds a third element to the continuum and makes it more like a triangle with two opposing ends and a critical stance on them both. So I hope this is a useful approach to reading the materials this week, and good luck. I look forward to postings and a good conversation about these approaches, and then using them later in the semester as we approach our cases. Bye.